Carrying on our gold and economic collapse narrative, and I'm going to introduce the IMF into this one as well. Part two. Truth is, gold never really went away. The power elites just stop talking about it publicly and ignore it. So anything you want to go away, you ignore, and you don't encourage questions about. You don't talk. You don't give regular information or updates about. You just want it to go away. It's kind of like. Gold is kind of like the pedophilic uncle living in the family house that no one truly acknowledges the full truth about. Only as opposed to being sordid and evil, it's ignored and everybody looks the other way because they fear its great relevance and power rather than its great evil. If we go through gold, why does the United States keep allegedly more than 8,000 tons? Yes, I know there's many that will say that Fort Knox don't have it, etc., but that is the official statement of it. Why wouldn't they just sell it all off? If it's a barbaric relic of no real value, why don't they just sell it off, assuming they have it? And assuming they don't, why don't they just say they have and get it off their books? Why is there this need? There's one of the largest 8,000 tons. Why do Germany and the IMF keep approximately 3,000 tons each? The IMF, 3,000 tons. The International Monetary Fund builds credibility for itself by holding gold. Otherwise, it's nothing. It's not a country. It's a freaking committee of bureaucrats that have been promoted out of the EU, etc., and other places like the Council for Foreign Relations, etc., and all these other little Soros-founded foundations, etc., It's 3,000. Who gave these guys the money to buy 3,000 tons of gold? You did. You did. Your governments did on your behalf in establishing it. That's what's happened. So why is this the case? Why is China accumulating at a rapid rate, probably the second largest and potentially even the largest gold holder? They're the biggest producer and none of it makes it to market. They're the biggest importer through Hong Kong from other nations. So what is going on? Officially, they're probably already the second largest holder, but they don't publicly disclose the amount. By the time they eventually do, if and when they do, it will be to show that they are the biggest. There's no doubt in my mind, if they ever do and come out, they will shock the world with how much. Until then, they're lowball and act like, no, we're just nothing, we're little kittens in the corner, we're not up to much. But they are rapaciously accumulating gold. Why is it that China and Russia are buying gold, but no one wants to talk about it? Let's talk about this IMF. It's the third largest gold holder on the official. I don't believe it is the third largest, but on the official level of people that are actually stating accurately or alleging to, it's the third largest. Well, it played its role in the monetary system was during the Bretton Woods conference in 1944 that it all kind of started up. And what happened is when you had fixed currencies between nations, they would then lend to countries that were running big deficits. In other words, if you're inefficient and say, you should restructure, you should cut wages, you should do all of this, rather than allowing devaluation, because they wanted all these fixed currency regimes, they would lend and then once again get these currencies beholden, in other words, own the debt of these nations. So this IMF is a creation out of nowhere. I happen to have a view as to how it was created, and the person behind it all. In fact, he passed away recently, but his cohorts and his family lineage play this game all the time, and they get nations indebted and then they own them. So Britain got indebted during the post-war era, and then eventually they were not meant to be allowed to devalue, but eventually they devalued. Then who else was it? It was the French did it as well, and they devalued, and all of this goes on with the help and cooperation of the IMF. So the IMF was there to maintain the fixed rate mechanism, and they weren't meant to allow you to devalue out. So this was before floating currencies. Now they were the swing lender. They were kind of like a lender to currency, to countries, but not a BIS. They weren't the Bank of International Settlements specific to central banks. They were like the governmental version to countries and states. So after the UK eventually was allowed and steeply devalued against the dollar, this was all during the Marshall Plan and paying back the war. Then you had the United States suspend the gold convertibility in the 70s when they were doing the Vietnam War, and the fixed exchange rate system suddenly died. So the IMF wandered into the wilderness for quite a while. It didn't seem to have a proper mandate, and its reputation suffered badly during 97, 98. Everyone accused them of having bad advice to the Asian nations. Joe Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winner, attributed that financial crisis to bad advice from the IMF. The IMF was like a whale that had washed up on the shore. It couldn't get back to its mission. And then what happened after that is by 2006, there were actually public calls to abolish the IMF. People forget this. We want the end of the IMF. What is its purpose? But just in time, cometh the man, cometh the hour. We had a global financial crisis in 2008, and suddenly the IMF had a role again. It was given its role. Isn't it amazing? Just when something is on its last legs, there's a major event for which it can be imperial and presidential about. And so we have the IMF in the game. And what brought it straight in the bang? It became the de facto secretariat between the G20 club of most powerful nations. So the IMF was the forum for all the central bankers of the top 20 nations to get together and chinwag, and then it could have a board of directors, etc., with full of staff and agency to implement the will of the board via the G20. So if you look at that membership, there's a lot of overlap with the G20 membership in terms of the IMF. You know, it's kind of like duplication. This is where you have super statedom. The G20 was a group of heads of states that didn't have a staff, while the IMF has a ready-made staff. So, you know, it was kind of like, here you have all your economists and people doing models and throwing out forecasts and all this work for the greater good that you are paying a bundle for to sustain, particularly America. So new lending facilities have become highly politicized, as seen in Ukraine and Greece, and IMF is seen as the role. Here they are, the guys coming in and they're lending in a hand to do good, while in fact it's a rich countries club. The IMF is a rich countries club that requires an 85% vote to make any significant changes, and occasionally does a little bit of highly profiled giving to the poor to keep its PR up. But it is a rich countries club for implementing the will of the rich countries. And that is the people that back it and pay for it most, which is the United States, largely as one, and as part of, as I say, Rockefeller-Kissinger doctrine. It is very, very powerful for that reasons. And we will see the emergence of the IMF's role even further when we get into the SDR and people start to let the aspects of the dollar hegemony fade away. The IMF will be absolutely at the fore in terms of what replaces this, and this will come with the end or the beginning and the finalization of the next economic crisis. And we're in that turmoil period from 2007 where we're going to have various discussion events, Treaty of Rome type, Bretton Woods type agreements, and we fumble our way through before the next model and reset is in place. Throughout all of this, however, it is worth pointing out that anybody who wants to be anybody in these countries and in these quasi parastatal global New World Order structures like the IMF, they all don't talk about gold, but all want to buy loads of it and have loads of it. So it's something you don't talk about, you don't mention, you don't act to bring about, you don't want discussion about, you don't tend to want to have questions asked of you about, but you focus a lot of resources in establishing your credibility in holding it. This tells me gold is money, and the last thing they want is for you to realize it and to go and get some for yourself. Make your own conclusions on that, but that's my take.